In a martial world teeming with danger, Tian He-jin, the supreme leader, hailed as the strongest martial god in the rivers and lakes, ruled for 4 decades. At his side stood the brilliant strategist Gal Saryang and his trusted retainer Baek Pyo. His life was a glorious past. At 29, he defeated both the Sword Emperor and the Fist King, enemy blood staining his battle robe, and a year later he ascended the throne as the supreme leader of the martial world. Once in power, he spent the prime of his youth purging the Jianghu. He shattered the Black Path's 13 devils, that notorious cult of terror, and annihilated the heirs of the demon sect, the Bloodheaven divine cult, erasing the scourge that had plagued the martial alliance for generations. In the end, he achieved peace, fulfilling the martial alliance's deepest wish. But even within the grand headquarters, danger lurked. Those who coveted absolute power poisoned his food and sent assassins in the night. Jin Thien H.C. survived every plot, personally eliminating all who dreamed of rebellion and cementing his unrivaled position. That was how he kept order across the land. To the people, his existence embodied justice and martial prowess, the greatest figure in the Jianghu. The burden of 4 decades as the strongest weighed heavily on his shoulders. But now age sapped him. Fatigue set in and his memory began to fade. He kept asking about Baek Pyo's 3-year-old child, so often that strategist Gal Saryang had to remind him the question had been repeated many times. Gal Saryang was genuinely worried about the supreme leader's health. Jin Thien H.C. closed his eyes and waved it off. "No, I'm fine. You may step back now." He turned to Baek Pyo. "You too. Go home. There's no need to escort me today." Though concerned, both obeyed. They cupped their hands in salute to the supreme leader and withdrew. When his retainers had left, the vast hall held only Jin Thien H.C. and the thickening snow falling outside. He murmured his retainer's words. "You are the world itself." He had reached the pinnacle of humanity, yet to arrive here had required a violent, blood-soaked past, countless battles, standing atop the bodies of many. His youth had been buried on the battlefield. Years passed, and the young man grew old. The marks of time carved into his flesh, returning him the appearance of a man who had borne the world for 4 decades. Suddenly, a searing pain struck like a bolt from heaven, making Jin Thien H.C. grimace in agony. He staggered, clutching his chest, wondering what was happening. The pain was so intense he could not stand. And then, the strongest martial god in the Jianghu collapsed onto the cold floor. When he came to, a faint scent of herbs lingered. Jin Thien H.C. opened his eyes. His head throbbed. Thinking that the world's strongest man could faint felt like an affront to his pride. He tried to hoist himself up, but immediately realized something was wrong. He checked his dantian and recoiled in horror. It was completely empty. Not a trace of inner power. No life force at all. Struck by the dispersing chi poison? Impossible. How could such a toxin affect him? This body is not his. At that moment, a man and a woman entered. The man said, "You're awake." The woman, worried, asked, "Are you all right?" Tian He-jin, now in the body of a young man named Duan, blinked in confusion. "Who are you?" Hearing that unfamiliar voice come from his own lips sent a shock through him. Duan's mother froze. "You asked who I am?" Her astonishment swiftly turned to fury. Veins bulged on her forehead, while Duan remained dazed, baffled as to why. She lashed out and slapped Duan across the face as her husband belatedly tried to intervene. "You should have begged for forgiveness. And what did you say?" She continued in a rage. "Come on, tell me. Who stayed up all night worrying over you?" Amid the chaos, the former supreme leader could only stammer, but his tone only enraged his mother more. She screamed, "I am your mother, you unfilial wretch. Is that how you speak to your own mother?" His father tried to hold her back but failed. Duan's father pleaded, "Please, calm down." It seems the boy isn't fully coherent after fainting, but Duan's mother writhed and shouted, "Let go of me." Amid the turmoil, Duan could only stare blankly, unable to grasp what was happening. Duan began to doubt himself. Is this a dream? It must be a dream. Otherwise, he glanced fleetingly at the mirror in the room. The reflection was not the imposing face of the martial god, but the youthful visage of a stranger. Duan trembled as he reached up to touch his face, astonished. "Is that me?" He pinched his cheek and felt the pain. "Ha, I knew it. This is a dream. But why is it so vivid? My neck hurts too." The shock proved too great. Tian He-jin in Duan's body fainted again. His parents were terrified as their son collapsed back onto the bed. Their frantic cries echoed everywhere. "Duan." Time passed, and a new day began. Duan quietly faced the bitter truth. This was not a dream. He had died and come back to life. Though the body had changed, the memories and authority of Tian He-jin remained intact. Just then, an elderly man entered carrying a tray of tea, and said with disdain, "How shameful." He set the tray down and said, "I was greatly disappointed yesterday." Duan replied, "I don't remember anything." And it was true. Duan knew nothing of this young man's life, so saying he didn't remember was honest. The old man snorted. "You don't remember? You're still the same irresponsible fool." Duan froze. Irresponsible? He had never been called that before. He recalled that as the supreme leader he had been decisive in reward and punishment. When facing hardship, he never blamed fate, nor relied on the loyalty of subordinates. How could a man like that be called irresponsible? And now he's the irresponsible one? Before leaving, he turned with contempt and said, "You are a disgrace to this family." With that, he slammed the door, leaving Duan alone in stunned bewilderment. He couldn't understand what this body's bastard owner had done to deserve such treatment the moment he woke. Just then, the door opened once more. Another retainer, a young man named Guangtu, barged in, grumbling, "You're awake. I told you you'd never win, even if the opponent was a woman. And on top of that, your drinking habit." Annoyed by the intruder, Duan frowned and asked, "And who are you?" Guangtu froze at Duan's question. It seemed he had heard the situation recounted by others, but Guangtu still eyed Duan with suspicion, as if wondering whether he was still pretending to be insane. He muttered, "If only you'd read the room better that day." Seeing his master's expression, Guangtu changed the subject. "Anyway, young master, take this chance to train seriously. Getting beaten by a woman isn't that a bit much?" That remark genuinely irritated Duan. Duan's look pushed Guangtu over the edge. He shouted, "I'm Guangtu. Stop pretending to have lost your memory." But this time, Duan truly remembered nothing. No matter how he explained, Guangtu thought he was joking. That remained the case until Duan pulled out 2 coins to repay the debt of 2 taels of silver Guangtu had fabricated as a test. Only then did Guangtu believe. The young master really had lost his mind. Having regained a sliver of trust, Duan decided to learn more about this body. Duan asked, "Start from the recent events. Why am I injured?" Guangtu explained, "You went to see Miss Song, were rejected, spoke rudely, and she struck you." Guangtu continued, "You were furious, drank heavily by yourself, and fell into the pond." Duan frowned and asked, "Who is Miss Song?" Guangtu was so shocked his eyes went wide. "Miss Song? You don't even remember her?" Duan nodded in confirmation. Guangtu explained she was Song Hualin, heir of the Song family, the most beautiful woman in Shandong. She was clever and strong-willed, a near-perfect woman with one fatal weakness. Duan asked curiously, "A fatal weakness? What is it?" Guangtu looked Duan dead in the eye and revealed a shocking truth. "She's your fiancé." Duan fell silent for a moment, then asked an unrelated question, "Do I often hit you?" Guangtu flinched in panic and hurriedly denied it. Duan clenched his fist and said, "My hand itches when I hear you speak. I don't know why I feel like hitting you." Guangtu could only give an embarrassed laugh. Duan stared at his hand and fell into thought. He could not imagine how wretched the former inhabitant of this body had been. But the more he heard, the clearer it became. This body had belonged to a debauched playboy gambling, brawling, indulging himself, and a source of shame to his family. Duan couldn't bear to listen any longer and cut him off. He thought to himself, just one slap from his mother for a bastard like that? In my previous life I would have beaten him half to death. Duan turned to Guangtu and asked the question he once asked his own subordinates. "Guangtu, what kind of man am I to you?" Guangtu took a deep breath, then bluntly replied, "Trash." That word stunned Duan. Tian He-jin, once hailed as a legend, now reborn in the body of a degenerate. He let out a soft sigh. The truth was a cruel one. If fate has granted him a second life, he would rewrite everything. A new life, a new journey, was about to begin. After being reborn, the soul of the martial world's leader awoke in the body of Bi Liden, the young master of the Bai family, a famed swordsman clan from Shandong. Ironically, this body was a complete failure, terrible martial skill, meager inner energy, and ruined social standing. Despite bearing the title heir of a sword sect, by 20 years old, Bai Liden had only a paltry 5 years of superficial inner training. The only remaining asset of value was Guangtu, a loyal, clumsy servant who cared for his master with all his heart. Bai Liden probed gently, trying to find clues about the death in his past life. "Have you heard any news? About the treasure map, the 2-headed spirit beast, or that the leader is dead?" Guangtu was shocked. He thought it impossible. How could a hale and hearty leader simply die? Bai Liden thought to himself. Several days had passed since his rebirth. There should have been rumors of the leader's death, that is, his previous life, so why had nothing happened? He guessed they might be hiding the truth. For if news of the martial leader's death leaked, the Jianghu would be thrown into chaos. Just then Guangtu remembered. "Young master, there's a rumor about you. They say you were beaten senseless by Miss Song. Bai Ladan felt embarrassed on behalf of his body's former owner. He asked whether Miss Song was so beautiful he'd willingly take a beating. Guang Tu, ever chatty, gushed about her famed beauty and how people lined up just to glimpse her. Bai Ladan answered curtly, "Don't remember. In his previous life he had courted many women, even one of the 4 great beauties of the Central Plains, yet he had never shared true love with any of them. The reason was that he became leader too young. Women saw him as a symbol, not a man. For him, the sword had been the only lover." Guang Tu kept babbling that, even after being beaten, the young master still wanted to meet Miss Song. Putting old romances aside, Bai Ladan declared decisively, "Forget Miss Song, the greatest beauty of Shandong or anyone else. Bring me a sword." Guang Tu, surprised, asked why he suddenly wanted a sword. Bai Ladan replied coldly, turning the question back. Why would a martial man need a reason to seek a sword? The sudden chill and change in his master made Guang Tu conclude. The young master had truly lost his mind. A while later, Guang Tu brought an old sword from the storage. Holding the sword, Bai Ladan's gaze grew pensive. It was the first time in a long while he had lifted a blade. Since reaching the summit, no enemy had been worthy enough to force him to draw his sword. Yet he still had not attained Xinjian, the mind sword, the realm where one can wield an invisible sword directly from the mind. Now reborn, Bai Ladan wanted to finish the unfinished path of the sword. Seeing the murderous aura radiating from him, Guang Tu panicked and warned, "Young master, you're not planning to use it to get revenge on Miss Song, are you?" Seeing Bai Ladan's solemn face, Guang Tu realized his master was not joking. Bai Ladan could only sigh. He truly could not fathom what kind of man the original owner of this body had been. Just then, Bai Ladan's mother appeared. She cut straight to the chase, questioning her son whether he truly intended to harm his fiancée Hualin and why he held a sword. Accused by his own mother, Bai Ladan sighed in exasperation. He had only just taken up the sword and was already being grilled. Putting aside his annoyance, he announced he would now train seriously in martial arts, leaving both his mother and the servant Guang Tu stunned. Bai Ladan's mother still couldn't believe her son's sudden change. She sighed, convinced he was still absurdly lying and surely plotting something sinister. Bai Ladan calmly called, "Mother." He said he didn't even know what he would do with the sword in the future, which only deepened her confusion. Then he added firmly, "But at least, I will never use this sword to stab my fiancée, nor will I use it to bully those weaker than myself." His eyes shone with a resolve she had never seen. Faced with that ironclad declaration and a complete 180-degree shift, Bai Ladan's mother was left speechless. Bai Ladan sank into thought. In his past life he had lived and breathed martial arts, devoted to the Jianghu and never able to marry. He still couldn't fathom why he had been reborn into Bai Ladan's body, but now that he was here, he resolved to live fully as Bai Ladan. He turned to reassure his mother, "Please don't worry." His mother remained stunned, unable to accept what she had just heard and seen. A few days later, Bai Ladan sat in meditation, concentrating intensely to circulate his qi. A powerful azure energy enveloped his body, signaling a fierce movement of inner power. All his inner power gathered at the dantian, forming a roaring vortex of energy. The qi erupted even more violently, marking a breakthrough in his cultivation. He exhaled slowly, ending the training session. The fierce qi dispersed, leaving behind tiny motes of light. He had transformed the body's 5 years of weak inner training into 5 years of pure inner power. With mindful intent, the Tianma circulation heart method was the world's best breathing control technique. He vowed, "From now on I will increase my inner power and endurance using this Tianma circulation heart method." Suddenly the door was flung open. A loud cry rang out. "Something big has happened." Guang Tu burst in, his face pale with panic. Contrasting the servant's alarm, Bai Ladan remained utterly calm. He thought to himself, "At last, the moment has come." He assumed the news of his past life's death had finally spread and asked, "The leader is dead?" Guang Tu looked bewildered and stammered, "What are you talking about? Why would the leader suddenly die?" Guang Tu hurriedly delivered the main news. "Master Song has arrived." Bai Ladan, with no memory of the man, asked, "Who is he?" Guang Tu explained he was the father of Miss Song, Grandmaster Song Yujing. Seeing the young master still composed only made him more anxious. Guang Tu finally blurted out the real reason for his panic. "Because Miss Song is here too." On the way there, Guang Tu never stopped nagging in Bai Ladan's ear, urging him to behave properly and apologize sincerely. Bai Ladan replied perfunctorily, but inwardly he was already making his own plans. When Bai Ladan and Guang Tu arrived, his father stood there to greet the guests. He said cheerfully, "Oh, everyone is here?" Bai Ladan's gaze immediately fixed on the girl accompanying them, the heir of the Song family, Song Hualin. He couldn't help but think, she's much more beautiful than I imagined. He chuckled inwardly. Now he understood why the body's former master had lost his wits over her. Song Holin's eyes were calm yet filled with unwavering determination. Bai Lidan's father greeted Master Song warmly. Long time no see. How have you been? Meanwhile, Bai Lidan and Guangtu bowed in proper etiquette. Song Yujing, head of the Song family, returned the greeting with a pleasant smile. Bai Lidan immediately apologized for the incident, trying to soothe the situation. Seeing his daughter silent, Song Yujing sternly called her name Hualin, which startled her. Bai Lidan's father hastily interjected, saying his son was the one at fault and Hualin should not be blamed. Unexpectedly, Song Hualin spoke up, saying that since everyone was present, she had something to say. Bai Lidan's father looked a little worried but still asked what she wished to say. Without hesitation, Song Hualin declared, "Please cancel our engagement." Her words even surprised Bai Lidan. All the elders present were deeply shocked by this sudden announcement. A tense silence fell. Bai Lidan's and Song Hualin's eyes met. Song Yujing was the first to break the silence. He turned to his daughter and shouted in anger and disbelief, What are you saying?" Song Hualin kept a resolute expression. She replied that the marriage had been arranged, and though she knew it seemed rude, she believed she had the right to choose her own husband. The elders were struck dumb by the boldness and decisiveness of the young woman. Contrary to the tense atmosphere, Bai Lidan looked oddly intrigued. A barely perceptible smile flickered across his lips. Bai Lidan's parents and the head of the Song family were still reeling. Song Hualin bowed deeply and apologized to Bai Lidan's parents. She said she knew they had treated her as a daughter, but she had no intention of marrying the young master Bai. This statement stunned Bai Lidan's parents even more. Song Yujing could not contain himself any longer. He angrily scolded his daughter for her rudeness. He demanded whether this was how she repaid those who had cared for her like a daughter, canceling the engagement unilaterally without discussion. He said her actions had brought shame on both families. Bai Lidan's father tried to intervene, suggesting Hualin must have her reasons. But Song Yujing remained furious. Amid Hualin's father's outburst, Bai Lidan unexpectedly cut in, his voice calm but firm. "I also want to cancel the engagement, just as Miss Song has said." The atmosphere immediately deflated. Everyone's attention turned to him. Everyone, from the elders to Guangtu, was stunned, especially Song Hualin, who turned to look at Bai Lidan with eyes full of astonishment and confusion. No one expected that the one who should feel most betrayed would be the one agreeing to call off the engagement. Bai Lidan apologized aloud, but inwardly thought, the former owner of this body may have been a scoundrel, yet he was surrounded by good people. He clarified that his agreement to cancel the engagement did not come from feeling slighted. Song Yujing asked in bewilderment, "Then why?" Bai Lidan replied calmly, "Because I want to be betrothed to the woman I choose." Song Hualin was once again taken aback by his answer. Bai Lidan's parents could only sigh in disappointment and helplessness. In the end, Bai Lidan's father spoke up, respecting the decision of the two young people. "Very well. If that is what you both wish, then so be it." However, Song Yujing was strongly opposed. He could not accept the engagement being called off so easily. Bai Lidan's father tried to persuade him that adults couldn't unilaterally decide the youngster's futures, but Song Yujing refused and stormed off with his daughter. Before leaving, Song Hualin glanced back at Bai Lidan one last time. She asked why he had changed his mind. Bai Lidan only smiled and replied wryly, "Your punch hurt too much." His answer left Hualin speechless. The Song clan departed soon after. After the guests had left, Bai Lidan's mother finally turned to ask her son what his true plans were. Bai Lidan apologized and said he had no intention of getting engaged at this time. His mother, furious, demanded why he had made such a fuss over Hualin if he had no plan to be betrothed. He could only apologize, thinking to himself that he couldn't explain the events that had occurred before he entered this body. His father then asked about his future intentions. Bai Lidan once again affirmed his plan to train in martial arts. His mother, stunned, asked, "Are you serious?" He smiled and replied confidently, "Yes, I am very serious." His mother remained in shock, unable to accept her son's transformation. Unlike his wife, Bai Lidan's father was cheerful and accepting. He invited his wife out for a celebratory drink, saying that if their son had decided this, they should support him. Bai Lidan watched his parents' backs as they left. He thought to himself, "Every time I feel their eyes on me, my heart aches." He reflected on how much they worried and trusted this damned man. A part of him feared that his family would make him soft. He worried that once he discovered that thing called love, his mind would become weak. Then he would be unable to act ruthlessly when necessary. It was a deep inner struggle. To dispel those tangled thoughts, he threw himself into training, exhausting himself completely. Bai Ladan began his grueling training regimen. His breath came hard, sweat streamed down his face. Unexpectedly, this body's stamina was so poor that running 12 miles without using internal energy left him nearly exhausted. Still, he pressed on, believing that with persistence this frail body would soon transform. While training, he heard a sound at the door. He opened the door a crack and froze for a moment. Standing before him was Miss Song in a pale pink outfit, her beauty like a flower blooming in the snow. She looked at him, her voice cold as ice. "I'm not here because I want to be. Don't misunderstand." Bai Ladan stood in the opposite courtyard and replied that he would not misunderstand. She continued, saying that her visit to apologize was at her father's request. Miss Song suddenly asked, "Do you remember what I said when I was drunk that day?" Bai Ladan was taken aback. She then repeated it, each word like a blade. "Let's see how long that pretty face lasts. Don't be arrogant, because it will wrinkle when you grow old." Hearing that, Bai Ladan could only fall silent, thinking to himself, "Good heavens, that bastard said all sorts of things." He had no choice but to apologize again. Miss Song replied curtly, "You're right." Her attitude surprised Bai Ladan a little. She explained that everyone praised her looks, but as time passed no one would pay attention. She wanted to build a name by skill rather than appearance, so she had no plans to court anyone at this time. Bai Ladan listened in silence. She continued, saying the main reason she cancelled the engagement was because she didn't like him. Hearing this, Bai Ladan only replied, "Ah, right, I understand your meaning." Miss Song looked him over with a probing gaze and asked whether he agreed to cancel the engagement because his pride was wounded. Once again, Bai Ladan appeared confused. Then he curled the corner of his mouth into a faint smile and casually said, "Do as you wish." He had lived nearly a lifetime. These emotions felt fitting for someone in their 20s. Dating and breaking up over pride, crying and laughing. He thought that was why the original owner of this body had made such a fuss. Bai Ladan looked straight into Miss Song's eyes and reiterated that she needn't worry, he had no intention of reversing the decision to cancel the engagement. Bai Ladan's resolute words stunned Miss Song. He turned and walked away, saying that from now on he would no longer be an obstacle in her life. Bai Ladan's completely changed demeanor left Miss Song extremely surprised. He silently left just like that, leaving Miss Song standing there with a tangle of thoughts. She watched his back recede, unable to help wondering about this sudden change. Meanwhile, as he walked, Bai Ladan recalled. He thought about his 20s in his previous life, a youth soaked in blood. The days of roaming everywhere to slay demons in the central regions felt like training. His youth wasn't dreamy green but only white and blood. He realized then that he had lived too hard. Continuing on, his gaze grew more determined than ever. From then on, Bai Ladan continued his arduous training. He went deep into the snowy mountains, sword in hand, eyes resolute. He stamped down on the thick snow, gripped the sword's hilt tightly, circulated his chi, and prepared to strike. Bai Ladan began to execute the soul-chasing Tu-La sword technique, and it was thanks to this sword art. He had once torn out the hearts of 13 underworld leaders. At that time, he fought alone against a monster and countless enemies. Each sword stroke was like a grand epic confronting powerful foes, even demons. With that sword technique, he beheaded the leader of the Bloodheaven sect and rose to become the strongest man in the world. Afterward, he sheathed his sword and stood amid the falling snow, the power of the move still radiating. Bai Ladan opened his eyes. A keen icy blue glinted in them, showing the focus and terrifying strength of a top master. He swung his sword once more, producing a powerful sword aura that tore up the ground and blew the surrounding snow away. The sword aura was so strong it formed a vortex, sweeping through a whole forest and leaving a blinding streak of light. After finishing the training session, Bai Ladan stood inside a circle carved by sword aura, surrounded by the aftershocks of the released power. He exhaled a puff of cold breath. It turned out that using martial arts was easier than he had thought. He wondered whether this body had been inherently talented in martial arts. Thinking this, Bai Ladan couldn't help feeling lucky. He wondered why the former Bai Ladan, who had such a fine body, had lived such a miserable and wretched life. At the same time, elsewhere, Miss Song's maid was reporting that she had heard young Master Bai Ladan had recently been practicing martial arts. Miss Song asked in surprise. The maid confirmed, saying it was something Bai Ladan had never done before. So everyone in the Bai swordsman family was very surprised. The maid suggested that perhaps Bai Ladan was doing it to win Miss Song's favor, but she immediately denied it. She insisted he didn't seem to be trying to impress her. The maid was extremely astonished by her mistress's words. Miss Song recalled the last encounter with Bai Ladan. His gaze and manner then had seemed genuine, not fake. The maid announced that today there would be a gathering of promising young masters. Miss Song asked whether she had to attend. The maid replied that she must, because young Master Yang of the Yang clan had sent repeated messages to ensure her presence. The maid was about to say more, but Miss Song cut her off and told her to stop. With a slightly annoyed expression, Miss Song said she would go and ordered the maid not to speak further. The maid reluctantly withdrew, saying she would prepare for her mistress to go out. Meanwhile, Bai Leiden had gone out into the streets hoping to hear news about the leader's death, that is, his own death in his previous life. However, he couldn't catch any rumors. He sat alone in his room, wondering why the announcement of his death had been delayed so long. Bai Ledan looked outside, wanting to go to the Martial Alliance to ask Gal Saryang for clarification, but given his current status, he knew he couldn't. Just then, he heard someone's arrival. A group appeared, including young masters and young ladies of the great families and notably Miss Song herself. All were surprised to see Bai Ledan. A man in the group spoke up, calling Bai Ledan's name and asking why that bastard was here. He stepped forward and jeered. "I heard you returned from the dead? Yet you look fine, don't you?" Bai Leiden thought to himself that yet another bastard had a problem with this body. He sat down and asked sarcastically, "I hear you've been learning martial arts lately. What's that about? Going to fight me?" Bai Ledan merely curled his lips in a smile, answered calmly, "Who trains to go beat people?" Then suddenly his gaze grew cold and razor-sharp. He said, "To kill the one I want to kill." Bai Ledan's words and murderous look stunned and terrified the stranger. Though the man still stood frozen in fear, Bai Ledan calmly took a sip of tea. The stranger couldn't understand how someone like Bai Ledan could make him feel so pressured, and he decided to save face. He regained his composure and resumed taunting Bai Ledan. "You debt? Addicted bastard? Weren't you crying after Miss Song defeated you?" Bai Leiden was surprised, thinking to himself, "Debt addicted? Have I ever borrowed from this guy? I should ask Wang Tu later." Hua Jin coldly denied it. "I've never said that." But the stranger didn't believe her. He claimed he knew without Miss Song having to say it. He sneered. "Miss Song, does this bastard bother you?" Song Hua Jin spoke up in defense. "Not at all." To avoid trouble, Bai Ledan put on his conical hat to leave, but the stranger wouldn't let go. He shouted, "Where do you think you're going?" Bai Ledan kept walking. The man turned and warned him, "From now on don't swagger around staring at others like that." Bai Ledan silently walked away, telling himself not to waste his emotions on children. He didn't know why he had been reborn as Bai Leiden, but at least this life wasn't meant to be wasted on such pathetic matters. The group watched Bai Leiden's retreating back, and all remarked that that bastard's temperament seemed a bit different. Miss Song also fell silent, deep in thought. Dusk fell, and Bai Leiden saw Guangtu still busily sweeping the courtyard. He approached in surprise and asked, "Why are you cleaning so late?" Guangtu replied that they had received word Lord Yang would pay a visit. Bai Leidan asked blankly, "Lord Yang? Who's that?" Guangtu, annoyed, asked, "You really don't remember this at all?" Bai Ledan honestly answered, "No, I don't." Guangtu sighed. Bai Ledan thought to himself that this guy truly believed he had amnesia, even though he kept asking the same questions. Guangtu explained, "I'm talking about the lord of the Yang clan, Yang Jize, and the Yang clan is the largest faction in Shandong." He added sadly, "We used to be number one." Bai Ledan asked, "Oh, so we're second now?" Guangtu replied, "No. The Yang clan is first, the Song clan second, and we're third." Bai Ledan, shocked, asked again, "You said we used to be number one and fell so far? What happened?" Guangtu snapped back, "Are you really asking because you don't know?" He was silent for a moment, then asked, "Was it because of me?" Guangtu bowed his head and admitted bitterly, "Yes, a lot of money was spent to settle the troubles you caused." Guangtu continued, "As finances worsened, we also had to reduce the number of fighters." Bai Leiden asked, "I even left debts?" Guangtu confirmed, "Of course, you owe many people, but I know you borrowed the most from the minor Yang branch." He recalled the man calling him a debt-addicted bastard. Only then did Bai Ledan understand why that man had acted so arrogantly. Guangtu added that their three major swordsman teams had gradually shrunk and had now been merged into one. The number of servants and helpers had also been reduced by more than half. Guangtu was stunned and exclaimed, "I've heard the finances have been dire lately." He also said despondently, "Seriously, it's a complete mess." Bai Ledan asked anxiously, "Your wages must be delayed too, right?" Guangtu replied that that hadn't happened yet, because the head of the household always cared about their pay. Hearing that, Bai Ledan suddenly realized, that bastard Bai Ledan, no, me, has corroded this family's future. Bai Ledan tried to change the subject. "Even if I muddied that pond, why make such a fuss over dinner?" Guangtu explained, "The person we owe is coming, so of course we must clean up thoroughly. Anyway, I'm busy, so let's talk later." With that, he hurried back to his work. Bai Ledan stood frozen, still in shock. Just then, a voice sounded from behind. The young lord of the Yang clan beat up Guangtu. The speaker was a young maid named Song He. Bai Lidan recalled Guangtu saying she was kind. He angrily asked, "That bastard hit Guangtu? Why?" Song He recounted. He said there was trash left in the yard and that those lazy servants deserved a beating. Bai Lidan grew angrier. "And he hit someone else's servant?" Song He burst into sobs and, choked with emotion, said, "But he was the one who threw the trash away." Bai Lidan was stunned, eyes wide with fury. He couldn't believe it. He threw the trash away yet beat another family's servant? And it was our servant? Song He could only bow her head, hands clenched in indignation. Bai Lidan asked in a trembling voice, Was I there too?" Song He confirmed, "Yes." She continued through her tears, "Not only were you there, you sneered and mocked when you saw Guangtu being beaten." The harsh truth struck Bai Lidan like a knife to the heart. He froze, his eyes filled with horror and blazing fury. He turned his back, only contempt in his mind. Bai Lidan, that bastard really is a foolish, stupid, and damnable man. He couldn't fathom how someone like that could exist. Song He wiped her tears and continued. "However, yesterday Guangtu said, 'The young lord is changing for the better.' I think now I can believe that." Her words stunned Bai Lidan. Song He admitted, "Honestly, I didn't trust the young lord, but I trust Guangtu." With that, she bowed and quietly left, leaving Bai Lidan alone with a tumult of emotions. Bai Lidan stood motionless, his eyes complex as he watched Song He's departing figure. He turned back to see Guangtu still diligently sweeping the yard in the sunset glow. He thought to himself, "Even after all that, he still treats me well." A feeling of responsibility and resolve rose strongly within him. As night fell, a loud shout rang from the main gate. "The lord of the clan has arrived." The gates slowly opened, and a group of people in lavish attire, exuding imposing bearing, entered. Leading them was Yang Jizhe, lord of the Yang clan, with an authoritative expression and a large retinue following. A tense confrontation was about to erupt. Night fell, and a flawless full moon hung high, signaling a night that would be anything but peaceful. Yang Jizhe spoke in an exaggerated, pompous tone, sending his regards to Lord Bai. From across, Lord Bai replied with equal politeness. He recognized the visitor as Elder Yang, who, despite the late hour, had deliberately come all the way here. Standing behind, Bai Lidan watched and thought to himself. He recalled that this man had once insisted on calling his father Old Bai, yet now both his form of address and his tone had completely changed. He continued thinking. Elder Yang's arrival at this hour, in the dead of night, was plainly disrespectful, an open show of contempt toward his family. In another corner, a young man of the Yang family also showed visible arrogance and annoyance. Bai Lian recalled that damned fellow who, over some ridiculous reason, had struck Guangtu. That grudge could not be easily forgiven. In the courtyard, the conversation continued. Elder Yang asked whether Lord Bai knew Peng Wendo, the grandmaster of the Peng family in Hebei. Lord Bai, of course, knew him. Elder Yang stroked his beard with self-satisfaction, boasting that Peng Wendu had agreed to a business partnership with him and was on his way to meet them. He added that he had spoken favorably of Lord Bai in front of the Master Peng. Though displeased inside, Lord Bai had to show gratitude. He thanked Elder Yang for his concern, but the smile looked forced. Elder Yang burst into a gleeful, arrogant laugh. He patted his chest smugly, claiming he was the only one caring for Lord Bai, making his superior, condescending attitude clear. Lord Bai had no choice but to invite everyone inside to discuss matters in detail. Elder Yang agreed perfunctorily, while the groups from both sides began to move. Yang Jigong, the Yang heir, stepped in front of Bai Lidan and sneered, calling him a debt lover. Standing face to face, the heir turned tense. Bai Lidan ground his teeth inwardly. He told himself to endure for his father and family. He felt guilty toward Guangtu, but this time he had to back down. Yet witnessing this nauseating scene made it hard for Bai Lidan to hold back. He broke into a sweat, anger ready to erupt. Bai Lidan lifted his head, trying to keep his last shred of calm. He turned and invited them in to eat, then walked away, a move to preserve the peace. But Yang Jigong wouldn't let it go. He shouted, demanding Bai Lidan stop talking nonsense and immediately repay the 20,000 Yang debt. Bai Lidan replied coldly. His tone changed. He said he didn't owe this Yang Jigong any money, implying the man had no right to demand repayment. Yang Jigong scoffed, challenging Bai Lidan's confidence. He sneered, asking whether Bai Lidan still considered himself the rightful heir of Shandong's top family. Bai Lidan turned his back and calmly admitted he knew he was no longer the heir. The answer surprised Yang Jigong's followers. Then he added a shocking line. "I know I'm a bastard." Bai Lidan and his men turned and walked away. Bai Liden's strange demeanor left those behind astonished. One of the Bai family's retainers wondered whether their young master had truly changed. As he walked, Bai Lidan pondered. 20,000 yang, a sum enough to drive a mid-sized sect into hardship. He wondered what he'd done to incur such a large debt. Just as he snapped out of his thoughts, a piercing scream rang out, causing Bai Lidan to halt. Seizing the moment of Bai Lidan's distraction, young Jigang grabbed the nearby Song He. He growled that since her worthless master won't look after her, she would serve as a replacement. Bai Lidan's eyes narrowed. His silence warned that a rage was about to erupt at young Jigang's vile action. Seeing that, Guangtu hurriedly grabbed young Jigang's hand, pleading in panic for him to spare the girl because she was too young. Being touched by a lowly wretch like Guangtu sent young Jigang into a furious rage. He roared in anger, while Guangtu froze in terror. Full of contempt, young Jigang contemptuously shoved Guangtu without mercy, enraging those around them further. Little Guangtu could only kneel on the ground, while Song He watched in fear. Young Jigang bared his teeth in a cruel grin. He thought to himself that the bastard must be courting death to dare treat him this way. Previously, young Jigang had grabbed Guangtu by the hair and beaten him. He asked with disdain, realizing this was the same kid from before. Young Jigang spat a wad of saliva onto the ground as a deliberate insult to Guangtu. The act stunned everyone. The captain of the Bai swordsmen and Guangtu's sister were horrified, while young Jigang and his cronies took delight. With a feigned look of disgust, young Jigang stared at the spit on the ground and asked what that filthy thing was. Guangtu was speechless. The boy stared in horror at the spit, not knowing what to do next. Seeing Guangtu not answer, young Jigang snarled, ordering him to respond to the question. Guangtu stammered that it was spit. Young Jigang scoffed and continued to humiliate the boy, asking why something like that would be on the path the honored guests walk, and reminding that he'd told them to keep it clean. Terrified, Guangtu stuttered he'd clean it up immediately and crawled toward the spit. But as Guangtu reached out to wipe it, young Jigang stomped hard on his hand with his foot, making the boy scream in pain. Young Jigang asked what Guangtu was doing. He laughed savagely and said that because it had been spat from a mouth, it should be cleaned with a mouth. His cruel words horrified Guangtu to the core. Other members of the Bai family watched with hatred and helplessness. The swordsman captain ground his teeth but could do nothing. In despair, Guangtu's sister burst into tears, saying she would clean it. But Guangtu pushed her away, shouting at her for even saying that. Guangtu tried to shove his sister aside, urging her to go ask the housemaster if he needed anything. He wanted her away from this humiliation. Witnessing the whole scene, Song He fought back tears. Her body trembled with anger. The two siblings knelt on the ground, and Song He turned to look at their young master with a pleading gaze. Finally, Bai Liden stepped out. He stood there with a cold face, no longer showing any patience. Seeing Bai Liden, Guangtu still urged his sister to leave. The girl looked at her brother with teary eyes. Bai Lidan spoke, his voice calm but powerful. Yes, we should clean up something filthy. Hearing Bai Lidan's words, Song He looked up, her eyes full of disappointment and astonishment. Guangtu was stunned, unable to believe his ears. The young master he thought had changed was apparently the same after all. Young Jigang and his followers sneered. He believed the rumor that the young master had changed was false. Opposite them, the Bai swordsman captain showed contempt. He snorted coldly, also disbelieving this supposed change. Thinking Bai Liden meant himself, Guangtu despairingly nodded, tears brimming, and said, "Yes, I'll clean it up." With utter humiliation, Guangtu bowed his head, ready to do as Yang Jigang ordered, tears streaming down his face. Yang Jigang bared his teeth in pleasure, delighted to have completely dominated and humiliated the Bai family's people. Just as Guangtu was about to bring his mouth down to lick the spit, the captain of the swordsmen couldn't bear it any longer and turned his face away so he wouldn't have to watch the degrading scene. At that moment, Bai Lidan spoke up to stop him. "What are you doing? Why are you cleaning that up, Guangtu?" Guangtu looked up, utterly confused by the young master's question. He stammered, "Sir?" Bai Lidan calmly declared with certainty, "Whoever spat it out must clean it up." Both Guangtu and his sister looked at Bai Liden, unable to believe what their young master had just said. They called his name in amazement. Bai Lidan turned to Yang Jigang, his gaze sharp. He said, "Yang Jigang, I'm talking about you. Clean up that filthy thing." Yang Jigang clenched his teeth in anger. He hadn't expected Bai Lidan to dare order him. Bai Liden threw back the exact words Yang Jigang had used on Guangtu. "Use your own filthy mouth to clean it up." His eyes now glowed with menace. Humiliated in return, Yang Jigang turned purple with rage, grinding his teeth as he roared, "You bastard!" Anger and fury were plain on Yang Jigang's face. He couldn't believe he'd been shamed by someone he always looked down on. Yang Jigang sneered, mocking Bai Lidan. You pup, I heard a girl beat you to a pulp, seems you've lost your mind. Bai Lidan ignored the provocation and turned to ask if Guangtu was all right. Still stunned, Guangtu asked why the young master had suddenly acted this way and insisted he could clean it himself. Bai Lidan patiently asked again, Didn't you hear me? Why should you be the one to clean it? Guangtu stammered, Young master. Bai Lidan's determined look showed he wasn't joking. He truly intended to handle the matter himself. Obediently, Guangtu stood up. To Guangtu's astonishment, Bai Lidan responded with a firm nod. His eyes held no hesitation, only iron resolve, confirming he was completely serious about what he was about to do. The captain, Seo Jung, stood motionless, still shocked by the young master's change. However, after a brief hesitation, Seo Jung clasped his hands and declared loudly, Captain of the swordsmen Seo Jung, at your command. His loyalty had begun to shift. Yang Jigang sneered arrogantly. He asked what Bai Lidan intended to do. What could someone like him possibly accomplish? Bai Lidan made one final offer. I'll pretend nothing happened if you formally apologize. Then he added, even if you use that filthy mouth to clean it, the ground will only get dirtier. An insult more bitter couldn't be delivered. Yang Jigang retorted defiantly, and if I refuse? Bai Lidan replied coldly and simply, you'll be beaten. Yang Jigang looked thoroughly pleased. He said, then let me see the skills of the great heir of the Bai clan. He's been waiting for this day for a long time, sneering that Bai Lidan was a penniless beggar. With that, Yang Jigang lunged forward, shouting he'd turn Bai Lidan into a fool who had to beg on the streets. Facing the attack, Bai Lidan simply watched calmly. The moment Yang Jigang lunged forward, Bai Lidan unleashed a lightning-fast punch that hit him square in the face. Everyone present from Seo Jung and Guangtu to the other members of the Bai family fell silent. They couldn't believe the young master's speed and strength. Yang Jigang staggered back, clutching his face in pain. He roared in anger and humiliation. His followers were equally stunned. In a fury, Yang Jigang gathered his inner power, his fist glowing red. Seo Jung realized immediately and panicked inwardly. Young master Yang Jigang is using inner energy. I must stop him. He feared Bai Lidan couldn't withstand it. Yang Jigang threw a punch full of inner force aimed straight at Bai Lidan. Yet Bai Lidan easily dodged the attack by an inch. Bai Lidan thought to himself, this bastard is using inner energy. If I get hit, I'll die. He knew how weak his current body was. Still, Bai Lidan continued to evade Yang Jigang's successive attacks with effortless precision, as if toying with him. A faint smile appeared on Bai Lidan's lips. He thought, yes, this is how it should be. He was enjoying the fight. Seeing this, Seo Jung and his subordinates were left speechless. The angrier Yang Jigang became, the more he attacked, unleashing powerful blows, yet none landed on Bai Lidan. Seo Jung exclaimed in astonishment. The young master's movements, he couldn't believe his eyes. At the same time, Bai Lidan closed in and delivered a strike that hit Yang Jigang's chest. Yang Jigang staggered back once more, his face bruised and battered. Yang Jigang ground his teeth and snarled, you bastard. Bai Lidan held his guard steady, ready for the next move. He launched a rapid series of hooking punches into his gut. Each blow targeted not only Yang Jigang's body, but served as punishment for his cruel actions, leaving him unable to respond. Bai Lidan continued delivering ruthless strikes to Yang Jigang's face and body, each punch filled with anger at his behavior. He finished his thought, you probably have no idea what that feels like. After the barrage, Bai Lidan finished with a final kick that sent Yang Jigang flying far away. Yang Jigang collapsed, utterly powerless and disastrously defeated. Everyone was stunned. They couldn't believe what had just happened. Their young master had truly defeated Yang Jigang. Yang Jigang lay sprawled on the ground. His followers hurried over, calling out, young master. Meanwhile, Bai Lidan stood firm, his expression cold. Bai Lidan stood there, his fists still clenched, the aura from the battle lingering around him. Yang Jigang's men helped him up, and one of them shouted angrily, asking Bai Lidan what he thought he was doing. Bai Lidan answered calmly, asking them in return if they had seen what Yang Jigang had done from the start. He reminded them that Yang had forced Guangtu to lick spit and asked whether that was the behavior of a human being. Bai Lidan's words silenced Yang's men. Overwhelmed with rage and shame, Yang Jigang roared, ordering his followers, kill him. He screamed maniacally, kill that bastard. That's an order. Hearing the order, the follower froze in stunned shock, which only made Yang Jigang angrier. He reached out and punched his own subordinate in the face. Though terrified at the thought of killing the heir of an entire clan, under coercion and reluctance, he still trembled as he placed his hand on the sword hilt. Seeing the hesitation, Seo Jung intervened. That was an order young Master Yang gave in anger, so you can disregard it. Bai Lidan looked over, slightly surprised. Despite the admonition, Seo Jung's hand remained lightly on his sword hilt. Think about the consequences of that order. The two sides faced each other in silence. On one side stood the Bai clan behind Bai Lidan. On the other were Yang's men supporting their young master. Young master's swordsmen began to hesitate, looking at one another unsure what to do. Seo Jung remained firm, his hand never leaving the hilt. Finally, a man who seemed to be the leader of Young's group spoke up, agreeing with Seo Jung. He said, "You're right, elder. We cannot kill the heir of the Bai clan." He concluded that this matter should be left for the heads of the families to resolve. A sensible decision to prevent escalation. Seeing his men disobey, Yang Jigong grew even angrier. He snatched a sword from one of his followers, snarled, "Troublesome scum," and charged at Bai Lidan himself, opening a new confrontation. He screamed a filthy curse like a madman, his eyes wild and full of murderous intent. Seeing young Master Yang about to strike, a nearby member of the Bai family shouted in panic, trying to stop him, but it was already too late. Contrasting with his opponent's ferocity, Bai Lidan remained completely calm. He easily dodged Yang Jigong's sword thrust. Then he raised his hand and stopped the blade with a single palm. The sharp sword was halted with an almost effortless grace. Bai Lidan didn't even bother to glance over, while Yang Jigong's eyes widened in disbelief at what had just happened. Bai Lidan lightly twisted his wrist, a terrifying force coursing into Yang Jigong's arm, forcing him to drop the sword hilt. Yang Jigong let out a hoarse cry as fresh blood spurted from his mouth. Bai Lidan's strike not only wounded him but rattled his internal organs. Not giving his opponent a chance to retaliate, Bai Lidan immediately subdued and threw Yang Jigong to the ground. What followed was a crushing punch to Yang Jigong's abdomen, causing him to curl in agony. Yang Jigong could only scream in unbearable pain under Bai Lidan's relentless and brutal assault. Bai Lidan kept a cold expression, his sharp gaze showing he had no intention of stopping. Then he delivered a powerful hook punch that struck Yang Jigong squarely in the face, sending him spinning through the air. Yang Jigong coughed up a mouthful of blood. It seemed he had suffered severe internal injuries. The sight left those around, even members of the Bai family, stunned in horror, while only Bai Lidan maintained his cold stare. Yang Jigong was kicked backward and fell unconscious. The Bai family members, including Guang Tu, gaped in shock at Bai Lidan's terrifying strength. After felling his opponent, Bai Lidan straightened up and brushed his hand as if he had done something trivial. Bai Lidan began issuing orders. He told someone to fetch a doctor for Yang Jigong and sent another to report immediately to the guild leader. Guang Tu panicked and asked Bai Lidan if he was crazy for daring to pick a fight with the Yang guild. Bai Lidan replied calmly, telling him to leave first. The family head would handle the rest. Guang Tu tried to pull Bai Lidan away, warning that if he stayed, the Yang leader would come and he'd be in big trouble. Bai Lidan shrugged him off and said that if he left, Guang Tu would be the one in trouble. Bai Lidan explained that it all began when he stopped Yang Jigong's insults. Therefore, the Yang leader's anger would surely be directed at Guang Tu. He couldn't abandon him. Guang Tu was stunned by Bai Lidan's explanation. At that moment, Bai Lidan smiled and said that perhaps it was already too late to leave. In the distance, two figures were coming in, breathing hard. They were the two family heads who had been notified and were rushing over. The Yang leader, Yang Jigong's father, appeared with an angry, murderous expression. He couldn't believe what he'd been told. Seeing Guang Tu still trembling, Bai Lidan turned and half-jokingly said, "Don't worry. When I die, I'll make sure you're buried with me." Hearing that, Guang Tu went pale and began sweating profusely. Bai Lidan's words did nothing to comfort him and only increased his fear. The atmosphere in the Bai household grew heavy under the silent night, signaling an unavoidable showdown as the uninvited guests arrived. Sure enough, the Yang leader stood right before them. He stared at the chaotic scene and growled, "What the hell is going on here?" At the sight of his father, Yang Jigong immediately tattled, pointing at Bai Lidan and claiming that he had tried to kill him. Hearing his son's words, the Yang leader narrowed his eyes, flames of fury burning as he looked at Bai Lidan. By contrast, Bai Lidan kept a calm face, without a trace of fear. The Yang clan leader turned to a subordinate present and asked, "Is that true?" The man stammered, unsure how to answer. Without waiting for a response, the Yang clan leader swung around and delivered a thunderous slap to his subordinate's face. He shouted furiously in the man's face, "Idiot!" His rage peaked. He punched and kicked the subordinate over and over, snarling, "What did you do to let the great heir of the Yang clan end up like this?" The rest stood at a distance, witnessing the violence. Bai Lidan's father, the family head, wore a grave expression. The hapless subordinate was beaten until he spat blood, collapsing on the ground, unable to rise. Even then, he kept striking the subordinate, his face still murderous. Everyone watched with bated breath. Guang Tu was terrified, while the remaining Yang subordinates could only stare at their leader in horror. The Yang clan leader stopped and coldly asked, "How do you intend to take responsibility for this?" Bailadan's father, the head of the family, glanced at his son, while Bailadan stood behind him in silence. Bailadan's father looked to the captain of the family's sword squad and asked, "What happened?" Seo Jung recounted everything in order, from the moment the subordinate faltered, each scene playing back like a film through the captain's words. The Yang clan leader roared that all this was over a mere servant and a lowly maid, yet Bailadan dared beat his son to such a state. "How dare you do that to my son?" Bailadan's silence only enraged the Yang leader further. He leaned in, growling through clenched teeth, demanding to know how Bailadan intended to take responsibility. Suddenly, Bailadan's father spoke up. "I believe the one who should take responsibility is the Yang clan leader." His words left Bailadan and Guang Tu behind him stunned. Not only Bailadan, but every member of the Bai family was taken aback. Behind them, even the supported Yang Jigong ground his teeth in fury. The Yang leader froze, hardly believing his ears. He gritted his teeth and forced out, "What did you just say?" Bailadan's father calmly explained. Yang Jigong not only channeled inner energy into his fist, he even drew his sword and tried to kill my son. He went on, "Meanwhile, my son was unarmed. Everyone here witnessed it, so I believe we have ample testimony." At that, members of the Bai family nodded in confirmation. They had seen everything clearly and were ready to testify to their lord's words. Bailadan's father continued in a lofty tone, "If it were anyone else, I would have punished them myself for such a grave offense. But I'll let you off this once for your sake." The Yang leader was stunned. He had never imagined that he, head of a great power, would be cornered and lectured by the master of a small clan. Bailadan's father pressed on, words like hammer blows, driving him to the wall. "If this leaks to the martial world, not only Yang Jigong but the Yang clan's reputation will become a laughingstock." Cornered, the Yang leader growled, eyes threatening. "What exactly are you trying to do?" Bailadan's father did not flinch. He shot back, firm and unyielding. "I could ask you the same question. What are you trying to do?" The Yang leader was left speechless by the other's unexpected resolve. Meanwhile, Bailadan watched quietly, a strange glint flickering in his eyes. Bailadan thought to himself, "I had believed father was timid, but it seems I was wrong." He realized he had misjudged the father he had in this life. Realizing he couldn't win the argument, the Yang leader resorted to threats. "I will not negotiate with you any longer. Lord Bai, return the money you borrowed immediately." Bailadan's father was unnaturally calm. He replied curtly, "Very well." Then he turned and called out loudly, "See the guests out." The Yang leader could only grit his teeth, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. The Yang leader ordered his men, "Let's go," and stormed off in a huff. The Bai household watched them until they were out of sight. After the Yang party had gone some distance, Bailadan's father turned to his son and asked, "Why did you do that?" Bailadan remained silent. After a moment, Bailadan spoke, his eyes turning cold. "He humiliated our family. He ordered us to do something no one should do." Guang Tu and the maid standing beside him were stunned when they heard Bailadan say the word family. It was the first time they'd heard him speak of the clan with such feeling. A meaningful silence passed between father and son. Bailadan's father called Captain Seo to accompany him for a moment, then the two departed. Bailadan stayed where he was, his expression slightly complicated. Bailadan remained lost in thought over his father's actions. Meanwhile, Guang Tu and the maid were still reeling from what had just occurred. Bailadan turned to the maid, offered a slight smile and asked, "You must be surprised, aren't you?" Maid Song He flinched and stammered her reply. Bailadan reassured her, saying she need no longer fear that bastard, for people like him are not worth being afraid of. He looked at her and promised firmly, "Rest assured. From now on, I and all the brothers of this household will protect you." The maid was astonished by Bailadan's pledge. Behind them, other clan members nodded in agreement, supporting the young master's words. Moved by everyone's kindness, the maid bowed, tears welling as she thanked the young master and the household staff. After everyone dispersed, only Bailadan, Guang Tu and the maid remained. The scene grew quieter. Guang Tu turned to Bailadan with a still worried look. "Young master, aren't you afraid?" Bailadan smiled confidently and replied with a question of his own. "Why should I be afraid?" Guang Tu hurriedly warned. "What if the Yangs storm in? Didn't I tell you they're the most powerful force in Shandong right now?" Bailadan analyzed calmly. He pointed out that the young fighters earlier clearly hated their master. Few were truly loyal. By contrast, their sword squad members were entirely different. Guang Tu remained uneasy and said, "But still, their numbers far outmatch ours." Bai Ladon concluded, victory isn't decided by numbers alone, and war doesn't erupt that easily. Guangtu couldn't believe it, even if his son was beaten nearly to death. Bai Ladon thought, a man skilled in political calculation like the Yang leader won't act rashly. He'll only strike when he's sure he'll win. He continued, the Yangs didn't even care about their son's condition. They're not angry because their son was hurt, but because I hit their son. Guangtu blankly asked, isn't that foolish? Bai Ladon replied, of course not. His anger has a different nature. Bai Ladon knew, he is selfish, thinking only of himself. Seeing Guangtu still bewildered, Bai Ladon said, go rest. You've worked hard today. Guangtu called out, young master. Bai Ladon turned, somewhat surprised. Guangtu blushed and awkwardly thanked Bai Ladon for what he'd done earlier. Bai Ladon simply offered a slight, meaningful smile. Bai Ladon turned away teasingly. Right. Don't forget that for the rest of your life. Guangtu was stunned by the young master's joke, feeling an unusual warmth inside. Left alone, Bai Ladon sank into thought. From my experience, I'm sure he won't act immediately. He will seek a method of total revenge. The image of the Yang leader filled his mind with hatred, or a way that doesn't dirty his own hands, Bai Ladon assessed. I must act before that happens. His gaze turned decisive. In another room, Bai Ladon's father cried out in alarm. No. He watched his wife open a brocade box to reveal a precious necklace inside. He said, isn't that our family's heirloom? It's also the thing you cherish most. Bai Ladon's mother sadly said the Yang leader was a petty man who didn't care about reasons. She intended to sell the necklace to pay off their debt to them. Bai Ladon's father strongly objected. He swore that while he lived he would not allow it to happen, but his wife gently replied, it's only an item. The father still disagreed. This is not merely an item. It's my wife's keepsake. It's what you cherish most. Bai Ladon's mother smiled kindly, her eyes full of love. You and Duan are the ones I cherish most. Hearing that, the father couldn't hold back his emotion, slightly stunned by her words. She continued, dear, our Duan has stood up on his own. What we need to protect isn't this item, but our son. Bai Ladon's father hesitantly asked, do you trust him? His wife, without hesitation, answered firmly, yes, I do. He asked again, even after he deceived us? She smiled through her tears. But he is still our son. Every word from his wife seemed to touch the deepest part of the father's heart. He said nothing, only quietly moved forward to embrace his wife. Outside, Bai Ladon's shadow stretched across the window. He had heard everything. He had intended to visit his parents but hadn't expected to overhear their conversation. At first, I thought I was reborn to continue my own wishes, but now he thought he might have been reborn for this Bai Ladon. However, hearing their discussion, for the first time in both lives, the Min Lord felt a stirring. I can't help but think perhaps I was reborn for this couple. But am I the right person? I have never known family love in my life. How can someone with a volatile temper, who stays up nights planning revenge tenfold against anyone who wrongs him, be their protector? Under the moonlight, the heavenly demon sank into questions about his very purpose. The next morning, the clatter of a horse-drawn carriage echoed along the mountain road, signaling a new journey had begun. On the rolling carriage, Guangtu stammered, hardly believing his ears. Young master, what did you just say? Bai Ladon, wearing a hat and leisurely reading, replied calmly. I said we're on our way to the Yang's place. Guangtu cried out in alarm. Why? To settle this matter. Bai Ladon answered briefly. After hearing that, Guangtu fell silent, sweat beginning to pour down. He summoned his courage and asked, but why? Are you taking me along? Bai Ladon smiled faintly and posed a riddle. There are two answers, one you'll like and one you won't. Which would you like to hear first? Guangtu closed his eyes in despair. Please tell me the bad answer first. Bai Ladon replied, knowing that this incident happened because of you. Do you have any objections? Guangtu was at a loss for words. He couldn't contest that reason and bowed his head to accept his fate. After a moment, he asked again, so, what's the good answer? Bai Ladon looked straight at Guangtu, his voice sincere. The only person I can trust is you. Guangtu was utterly stunned by that declaration. After a while, he muttered wryly, young master, you're making me pity your meager and narrow social circle. Looking at the dirt road ahead, Guangtu asked, so what's your plan? Bai Ladon answered nonchalantly, I'll think as we go. Desperately, Guangtu thought, how can someone so badly hurt be this upbeat? As if reading his mind, Bai Ladon teased, you could be like me. When we get there, plenty of people will try to beat you up. If you get hit on the head, won't you become upbeat too? Guangtu was left speechless, his face drained pale with fear. Bai Ladan reflected on the changes in his personality. He realized he had become more playful, very different from the rigid person he was in his previous life. Was it because this body was younger, or was it his way of resisting the restrictive past? In another development, Yang Jize was angrily scolding his son. Yang Jigong, his body wrapped in bandages, bitterly begged his father to kill Bai Ladan and wipe out his entire clan. Yang Jize coldly replied that that was his plan as well. Yang Jize's fury reached its peak. He could not accept being looked down on and humiliated by an obscure, insignificant family in Shandong. With a murderous look, Yang Jize declared that he had summoned the bloodhounds. Yang Jigong was stunned by his father's declaration. Yang Jize sneered cruelly, affirming that those who had angered him would pay a very high price. Back with Bai Ladan and his servant Guang Tu, seeing his master reading, Guang Tu whispered in surprise, "Isn't that the master's unique sword technique?" Bai Ladan replied casually, "Yes, but why are you whispering?" Guang Tu nervously explained that it was a precious martial art, and he feared the coachman outside might hear. Bai Ladan laughed, saying Guang Tu's sneaking around made him look even more suspicious. Realizing his foolishness, Guang Tu flinched in panic and hurriedly covered his mouth with his hand. To save face, Guang Tu blurted out loudly that the White Moon sword technique was nothing special. Bai Ladan teased him, saying he would go tell his father. Guang Tu turned pale, frantically protested, and praised the White Moon sword technique as the best under heaven. Bai Ladan calmly advised him to stop, saying continuing would only make him more suspicious. Guang Tu angrily shouted, "So what?" Meanwhile, Bai Ladan merely smiled softly, completely unfazed by his servant's outburst. In his thoughts, Bai Ladan rated the sword technique only slightly above average. He didn't truly need to learn it, but it was the only way to hide his real martial skill. Guang Tu remarked that it was strange to see Bai Ladan reading. He teased that before, the only things Bai Ladan read were tavern menus and lists of courtesans. Suddenly, Bai Ladan asked Guang Tu, "Do you want to learn martial arts?" The question left Guang Tu stunned. After a moment's hesitation, Guang Tu answered no. Bai Ladan perceptively noticed that hesitation. Guang Tu bowed his head sadly, saying how could someone like him possibly learn martial arts? Bai Ladan countered, saying even people like Yang Jigong learned martial arts. Guang Tu replied that was because he was born into a good family and had skilled masters teaching him from a young age. Bai Ladan disagreed. He said that to become someone in the Jianghu, family background or a master weren't the most important things. Guang Tu curiously asked what then was important. Bai Ladan paused for a moment. Seeing this, Guang Tu began to guess. Was it talent, physique, willpower, or effort? Bai Ladan said there was something even more important than those. He then unhurriedly revealed the answer. Connections. The word left Guang Tu reeling. Guang Tu asked blankly, "Connections?" Bai Ladan smiled and confirmed, "Yes, connections within the Jianghu." Guang Tu still couldn't grasp the deeper meaning of his master's words. He gave up and told Bai Ladan to just say it plainly if he didn't want to explain. Bai Ladan only replied with a mysterious smile. Bai Ladan was completely serious about what he had just said. In his mind, he reaffirmed that for someone who wants to become a figure in the Jianghu, connections are the most important thing. A silence passed. Bai Ladan and Guang Tu looked out the window together and continued their journey. Night fell, and they stopped at an inn. The wooden door slowly opened, signaling a night's rest after the long road. However, when Bai Ladan went to the counter and asked for a room, Guang Tu looked embarrassed. He hurriedly hugged a pillow and stammered that he would sleep on the carriage. Bai Ladan scolded Guang Tu for his nonsense. He insisted he would not rent a room only to make his servant sleep outside in this cold weather. Guang Tu was bewildered. Bai Ladan explained that they could share a room. The room had 2 beds, and he didn't want to waste money renting 2 separate rooms. Guang Tu was horrified, thinking that sharing a room with the young master was a form of sacrilege. He insisted on sleeping on the carriage, but Bai Ladan cut in and invited him to have a few drinks before going up to the room. The offer left Guang Tu stunned again. Bai Ladan sat at a table and casually asked, "Besides you, is there anyone else here?" Then called to the server and ordered some snacks and wine. While the maid happily agreed, Guang Tu remained frozen in shock. Seeing this, Bai Ladan called him over to sit at the table. Guang Tu hesitantly sat down. When Bai Ladan asked what was the matter, he stammered that this was the first time. The first time he had sat at the same table and drunk with the young master. Guang Tu added that, not to mention, it was also the first time they would sleep in the same room. Bai Ladan thought to himself that his old self had been a fool for treating his servant so badly. Bai Ladan picked up the wine bottle and offered to pour for Guang Tu. The gesture startled Guang Tu, who snatched the bottle and said it was proper etiquette for him to pour for the young master. Bai Ladan brushed aside the formalities and told Guang Tu to take it. Still, Guang Tu kept refusing, repeatedly calling out, "Young master." Bai Ladan insisted that Guangtu was older and should drink first. Saying so, he poured wine into Guangtu's cup. Guangtu worried this would become a bad habit, but he still raised the cup. He vowed to himself to drink only this once and to never forget this favor for the rest of his life. Seeing Guangtu still flustered, Bai Ladan told him not to worry and to pour himself some wine. Guangtu remained astonished. Suddenly, Guangtu seemed to have an epiphany. He looked at Bai Ladan in surprise and exclaimed, "I understand now." Guangtu's face turned serious. He stared at Biladan and asked, "You brought me along to kill me, didn't you?" Guangtu's sudden and odd question made Bai Ladan choke on his wine. Guangtu continued his logical deduction. "That's why you're being nice to me, right?" The more Guangtu spoke, the more convinced he became of his theory. Bai Ladan could only fall silent at this oh my god level of logic. Guangtu even cited a proverb, "People usually fatten the ox well the day before they slaughter it." After a moment of silence, Guangtu finally remembered what he wanted to ask. He said he had been too busy earlier to ask the young master. Bai Ladan asked what he wanted to ask about. Guangtu asked about his martial arts, how he could defeat that bastard so easily. Bai Ladan casually replied that he had been practicing recently. Guangtu was puzzled because he had only been practicing for 10 days. Bai Ladan replied confidently, 10 days is more than enough to deal with that kind of trash. Guangtu still couldn't believe it. He was sure this was his young master, but why had he changed so much? Bai Ladan just laughed and joked that maybe he was a late bloomer, then drained his cup. Guangtu set his cup down and looked straight at Bai Ladan. He said he wasn't asking for much, just that the young master don't change again, don't go back to the way he was. Moved by Guangtu's pleading look, Bai Ladan smiled gently and replied, "I won't." Guangtu begged, "Please promise me you won't suddenly go back to how you used to be." Bai Ladan merely smiled, thinking an empty promise wasn't that important. Guangtu insisted, "It matters to me. I need to hear it." Bai Ladan looked deeply into his servant's eyes and felt the sincerity there. Finally, Bai Ladan agreed. He smiled softly and said, "All right, I promise you." After reassuring Guangtu, Bai Ladan added, "And I've always hidden my martial arts. I'm much stronger than you think." Guangtu asked in astonishment why he had to do that. Bai Ladan explained a survival principle. If you want to live long in the Jianghu, you must hide at least 30% of your strength. Guangtu asked if the young master had purposely acted like a vagabond. Bai Ladan denied it, saying not exactly. He explained that after being beaten by Miss Song, he woke up to the fact that he couldn't live the same way anymore. Bai Ladan thought to himself that with this perfect excuse, Guangtu would have no choice but to believe in his change. Bai Ladan invited Guangtu to drink another cup. Guangtu smiled awkwardly and joked that if the young master kept treating him well like this, he'd pick up some bad habits. Bai Ladan smirked. "I don't mind if you pick up a few bad habits." Bai Ladan's words made Guangtu blush, embarrassed and not knowing how to respond. He held out his cup to receive the wine the young master poured. The atmosphere grew more pleasant. Bai Ladan refilled his own cup, a smile still on his lips. Bai Ladan mused that this was the first time in both his lives that he felt this drunk. The next day, they reached Dongping. Walking along the trail, Bai Ladan asked Guangtu about their next plan. He said they needed to find out what the enemy was plotting. Guangtu asked how to do that. Bai Ladan explained that since the enemy's plan was secret, they needed someone on the inside to leak information out. Hearing this, Guangtu looked worried. Suddenly, Guangtu volunteered for the task, offering that Bai Ladan should give the job to him. Seeing the determination in Guangtu's eyes, Bai Ladan warned that the mission could be very dangerous. Bai Ladan described the brutal punishments Guangtu might face if captured, being tortured with red-hot iron, or having fingers sawed off. Guangtu shuddered at the words. Despite his fear, Guangtu forced a smile and said it was fine. He joked that before being tortured, he'd reveal Bai Ladan's whereabouts and claim he was the one who gave the orders. Contrary to Guangtu's expectation, Bai Ladan said seriously, "Make sure you do that." He explained that that was wise loyalty. Guangtu was surprised. He hadn't expected Bai Ladan to say that when he was only joking. Bai Ladan affirmed that he was completely serious. Bai Ladan explained that the highest loyalty is sacrificing oneself unto death, but that's not what he wanted from Guangtu. Guangtu asked awkwardly whether betraying one's master would count as betrayal. Bai Ladan smiled. At least for now, that's still considered wise loyalty. Although he found the concept complicated, Guangtu did not regret his decision. He clenched his fist, and once more vowed to complete the mission. With trusting eyes, Bai Ladan calmly replied, "All right, do whatever you think is appropriate." Guangtu promised firmly, "I will return, young master." Guangtu turned and left. Bai Ladan stood watching silently, but then Guangtu paused. He turned back, forcing a smile as he asked, "You let me go alone like this, but you'll secretly follow and protect me from somewhere no one sees, right? Bai Ladan replied, if that makes you feel better, think whatever you like. I've entrusted this entire job to you. Guangtu took a deep breath, steeled himself, and turned away with renewed determination. After walking a short distance, Guangtu shouted back, when I return, you must buy me a drink, young master. Watching Guangtu's retreating back, Bai Ladan smiled softly. He thought to himself, I trust you. Bai Ladan watched until Guangtu disappeared. So, make sure you succeed. 4 days passed. Bai Ladan sat by the inn window, filled with worry. He couldn't stop thinking about Guangtu's fate. By now, he might have been captured and tortured, or worse, be a corpse buried underground. Suddenly, the door opened. Bai Ladan startled and turned around. A man wearing a wide-brimmed conical hat that hid most of his face stood in the doorway. The man spoke. The world is vast. Meeting like this may be fate. Let's have a drink. He sat down. It was Guangtu returned. Bai Ladan smiled and asked, was the trip successful? Guangtu took off his hat, his face showing exhaustion but also relief. He complained that he had been terrified. Bai Ladan asked what had happened. Guangtu reported at once. The Yang family is secretly recruiting talented wanderers through a man named Bloodhound. Bai Ladan frowned. So the Yang family was gathering mercenaries. Guangtu confirmed, saying they had gathered dozens and were clearly planning an attack. At the same time, they were spreading false rumors. Bai Ladan calmly remarked that with his unsavory past, people would naturally believe those rumors. Guangtu hurried to defend him. He insisted that although Bai Ladan used to beat people, he was never the kind of scum who raped women. Bai Ladan brushed it off, saying rumors tend to be exaggerated. He asked Guangtu how he got the information had he disguised himself as a wanderer. Guangtu hesitated and answered that a maid of the Yang family had told him. Guangtu revealed that one of the Yang family's maids had sided with him. Bai Ladan appeared quite surprised by this news. Guangtu grinned slyly and said, as you know, I'm the one who understands the feelings of girls like her best, right? They both laughed. Guangtu added that he had also been lucky. He revealed another rumor. Yang Jigong had acted cruelly, killing the maid who served him. Bai Ladan smiled and said, that's why no one likes the Yangs. Bai Ladan silently praised Guangtu. Although he got the information easily thanks to the maid, luck is also a kind of skill. Without the right approach, he wouldn't have had that luck. Guangtu continued that, thanks to the maid, he learned the name Bloodhound and that the Yang family was recruiting wanderers. He bought these accessories to blend in with the wanderers and gather more information. However, Guangtu confessed sheepishly that he was too scared and couldn't go through with it. He bowed his head and apologized. Bai Ladan immediately reassured him. No, you've done more than I expected. Guangtu added with a mischievous look. And this time, I've also confirmed something new. Bai Ladan asked curiously what it was. With a smug, radiant expression, Guangtu declared, I discovered that my face is very effective with women. Bai Ladan was left speechless. Pleased with his looks, Guangtu asked whether they should return now to report to the master. But Bai Ladan replied calmly, no, we won't return. Guangtu blinked in surprise and asked again, not return? Bai Ladan became more determined than ever. He replied, we will finish this. In a sealed room at the Yang residence, the crippled young master Yang Jigong kept screaming at the trembling maid. While the girl sobbed and begged desperately, he still turned a deaf ear. His body lay motionless on the bed, wrapped in bandages from head to toe. Even though she begged, saying she already had a fiancé, it did not significantly affect his decision. And he even glared, threatening to kill her fiancé right in front of her. Those words left the girl stunned, terrified beyond measure, her eyes wide in disbelief at what she had just heard. He gave the maid 2 cruel choices. Serve me, or his life. Which is more important to you? Make your decision. The girl could only clutch her chest and tremble. Her sobs stuck in her throat. He was pleased by that look of despair. Indeed, if she served him, the fiancé would be safe. Just as the desperate girl began to unfasten her buttons, a shimmering shaft of light, like a needle of brilliance, suddenly pierced the air. She jolted and lifted her head, her whole body frozen and unable to move. Yang Jigong was also terrified, eyes wide as he shouted, who the hell dares? A mysterious figure in black walked in. Slow, steady footsteps echoed through the room. He spoke to reassure the frightened girl. Don't be afraid. I only blocked your vital points, so you won't be able to move for a moment. As he passed her, he added by way of excuse, young lady, not all men in this world are like that. His eyes hardened as he stared at the bastard lying on the bed. He sneered, you shouldn't let one mad dog bite you and then think all dogs are mad, right? Yang Jigong glared in fury, his body immobilized and unable to react, only able to scream in terror. Ignoring his screams, the mysterious man struck the girl unconscious with one hand, not forgetting to say, "Forget everything that happened today, and live happily with your fiancé." Horror couldn't be hidden on Yang Jigong's face. He looked up at the man in black, trying to recognize the familiar voice. A chill ran down his spine as a terrifying name suddenly flashed into his mind. "Don't tell me it's bye-bye." Without a moment's hesitation, a cold, sharp sword plunged into Yang Jigong's belly, making his eyes bulge. He coughed up a mouthful of blood. His internal organs were clearly grievously wounded. Now, facing imminent death, he could no longer keep his usual arrogance and desperately begged for mercy. "Stop, stop, it's my fault, please." The mysterious man's cold eyes stared straight at the trembling man beneath him. "When so many others have pleaded with you, what did you do?" Yang Jigong trembled in despair, unable to believe he would die like this. A streak of sword light exploded in the air, carrying a chilling killing intent, officially ending the life of the Yang family's young master. In another room, the Yang family elders held a tense meeting. Deputy Sect Chief Zhang Yu repeatedly warned their leader, Yang Jizhe, about the consequences of attacking the Bai Sword clan. Contrary to Zhang Yu's concern, Yang Jizhe was completely unconcerned. "My son almost died, what do you want me to do about it? And don't pretend to be kind anymore." Even though the truth was being twisted, the deputy guild leader understood the incident had been caused by his own young master. Moreover, the guild leader was acting in the name of the righteous sect yet hired scoundrels to destroy another school just because his son had been beaten. Although inwardly dissatisfied with his guild leader, he could do nothing about it. Zhang Yu continued to urge restraint. Just then, an unfamiliar voice cut him off. The Bloodhound, a mercenary who looked like an assassin, glared at Zhang Yu with mockery and issued a warning. He pressed Yang Mon to make a quick decision, warning that if they delayed, the secret would be exposed because mercenaries answer to no master, and without a clear answer, they would disband. Despite the deputy guild leader's objections, Yang Jizhe remained resolute. "That will not happen. We will proceed with the plan." His motives weren't merely to avenge his son, but also to seize the power of the Bai family. Even weakened, their influence still remained. Wouldn't that double the Yang family's strength? The deputy guild leader continued to object, pointing out that Bai Sword House's influence stemmed from the trust local martial artists had in them. Instead of considering this, Yang Jizhe growled and glared. "Are you saying I'm worse than him?" Though that wasn't the implication, a petty, selfish man like Yang Jizhe refused to accept it. He laughed contemptuously, dismissing the value of trust altogether. There are only two kinds in the martial world, the strong and the weak. Where the strong dominate and the weak are ruled, that is the Jianghu. The deputy guild leader still tried to uphold principle. He admitted they were not righteous, but they could not act cruelly under the guise of a righteous sect. Finally, he declared, "Guild leader, if you attack the Bai Sword House, I cannot continue to serve you." Guild leader Yang was furious at this condition. "What? You dare set terms with me? Get out before I kill you." However, the deputy guild leader remained standing. "Did I tell you to leave? Do you really want to die?" Zhang Yu couldn't believe it. He had served this family for 20 years, devoting himself completely, to the point that it wasn't an exaggeration to say Yang Guild wouldn't be what it is without him. And now he was treated like this? As Zhang Yu prepared to leave, Yang Jizhe continued spreading cruelty. He ordered the Bloodhound, make sure not only the Bai family members, but also the dogs they keep will be eliminated. This declaration enraged Zhang Yu. "This is outrageous. How can they be so cruel?" He gritted his teeth. Though he once wanted to make Yang Guild the greatest in the world, he knew he had to leave. At that moment, a mysterious masked figure appeared, startling the deputy guild leader. The person held a sword and strode forward with confident bearing. The deputy guild leader drew his sword and asked, "Who are you?" The masked man coldly issued an ultimatum. "Deputy guild leader, do you want to end things this way?" As quick as lightning, the stranger closed in beside him before the deputy guild leader could react. When he asked in bewilderment, the man replied decisively, "I'm saying you will die, for protecting such scoundrels." Zhang Yu was astonished to realize the opponent was a true master. The masked man issued a cold warning. "If you don't want your life to end in agony, wait here, because this will be the turning point of your life." The deputy guild leader could only stand frozen in place, his whole body seemingly unable to move. Moments later, the door to the room opened again. The masked man strolled in calmly, to the astonishment of those inside. Yang Jizhe shouted, "Who the hell are you?" The masked man replied with a sentence that terrified the guild leader. "The son of the family you're trying to destroy." He continued to shout and curse, but that familiar voice made him freeze and exclaim, "Bai Liduan." The stranger was none other than the Bai family's young master, Bai Liduan. Yang Jizhe flew into a rage, unable to believe he had made it all the way in here. But that didn't matter. He ordered the bloodhound to kill Bai Liduan. The bloodhound grinned slyly and stated his condition. 5,000 taels of silver. He flew into a rage. What the hell are you saying? That bastard must be killed immediately. The bloodhound only reminded him. If you don't want to, then do it yourself. Recognizing his subordinate's greed, Chief Yang ground his teeth. This money, hungry dog. In the end, given the urgency, he was forced to concede. Damn it. Fine, I understand. Deal with him quickly. The bloodhound received the order and broke into a satisfied smile. He drew his weapon, a heavy spiked mace. He taunted his opponent. Kid, I should thank you. Because of you, I'm getting an extra 5,000 taels. Contrary to what others expected, Bai Liduan remained extremely calm. He looked straight at the man in front of him and asked, Are you the mercenary they call the Bloodhound? The Bloodhound sneered. Yes, it's surprising that a kid like you knows my name. So you also know you'll be dead soon, don't you? With that, he lunged to attack. He swung the mace down in a powerful strike. But Bai Liduan nimbly dodged to one side. The forceful aura of the blow violently shattered the entire rear door. Bai Liduan knew he had to move with absolute precision. One wrong step, one failed dodge, and that single strike would end him. Meanwhile, the Bloodhound continued to strike relentlessly, each blow imbued with immense force, but Bai Liduan evaded with effortless grace. He couldn't help but praise. This one is quite nimble, isn't he? Bai Liduan was struggling slightly to dodge. Though his inherent martial arts skill was profound, his current body was too slow. Nevertheless, with the combat experience of countless years from his previous life, he was still able to anticipate and evade every strike. A strange sensation arose. I don't know why I feel an unusual excitement and thrill. How long has it been since I fought a life or death battle like this? And he suddenly understood the nature of that feeling. I love to fight. He reminisced about his final years, filled with peaceful days. Nothing but sheer boredom. But now, in this battle, he felt the electrifying tension of facing potential death. A flash of the sword streaked like lightning. Right before the Bloodhound's eyes, he froze in shock, watching the sharp, sweet-cutting sword strike without time to react. Bai Liduan executed the ultimate sword technique, asura soul-subduing sword art, delivering the first decisive strike. With a single cut, he sliced across the Bloodhound. His signature weapon flew from his grasp, and blood splattered as he collapsed to the floor. Young Jizai couldn't believe his eyes, watching the young man before him, holding his sword majestically, defeat the enemy. But only a second later, he suddenly felt a searing pain. A twisted, energy-like hole was sunken into his chest, blood spraying out. He didn't understand. When had he been injured? Standing firm after the attack, Bai Liduan coldly glanced back at the dying man. Still in disbelief, Yang Jizai questioned, Bai Liduan, how do you possess this kind of martial art? Bai Liduan bent down, picked up the Bloodhound's spiked mace, walked over, and replied, Who knows? Would you even understand if I explained it to you? He looked suspicious. Don't tell me you intend to make it look like the Bloodhound and I had a conflict. Bai Liduan was cold and decisive, confirming the plan. It's similar, but you're not quite right. I will make it appear as if the Bloodhound fled after killing you. Faced with death, the gang leader fell into despair, attempting to bribe his foe. Wait. I'll give you anything if you spare my life. He opened a box filled with silver coins and gold bars, earnestly bargaining. It will benefit you and your family. If sold, it totals over 30,000 taels of silver. There's still quite a bit of other property in addition to this. Bai Liduan was completely unmoved, looking down. See, you can still make demands of me, can you? Gang leader Yang continued to plead. If you spare me, I will give you everything. But if I die, you won't be able to find anything. Bai Liduan's voice rang out with irony, echoing the very ruthless philosophy the man had declared earlier. I heard what you said earlier. In the martial world, there are only two kinds of people. The strong and the weak. Bai Liduan made the chilling declaration. It seems. You are the weak one today. Immediately after that statement, the gang leader realized his fate was sealed. What followed was a decisive strike. The gang leader fell. Bai Liduan opened his mouth coldly. Come in. Vice leader Zheng Yu opened the door and stepped in, but the scene he beheld was utterly astonishing. Along with Yang Jizai's corpse, the Bloodhound's body also lay on the blood-soaked floor. He couldn't believe his eyes. Had this young master personally killed both of them? Amidst the vice leader's shock, Bai Liduan spoke. Steward Zheng Yu, from now on, you will be the new gang leader of the Yang Gang. The words utterly shocked Zheng Yu. He was completely stunned by the announcement.